My best friend was secretly using my contacts to steal my career, until one mistake exposed her. For 11 years, she was my closest friend. Then I found a private planning document on her laptop where she'd written a step-by-step strategy to take over my professional connections and phase me out of her life. I was standing in the middle of a rooftop party when I saw her laughing. Not just laughing, performing. Head thrown back, hand on the arm of my would-be boss, Marcus Hale, like she'd known him for years. She hadn't. I had. I'd spent 8 months building that relationship, sending thoughtful follow-up emails, attending his firm's networking events, carefully positioning myself for the creative director role that was supposed to be the next chapter of my life. And there was Ashley, my best friend of 11 years, my emergency contact, the maid of honor I'd already mentally chosen for a wedding that hadn't happened yet, standing exactly where I should have been, doing exactly what I should have been doing, with a smile I suddenly didn't recognize. She saw me, her expression didn't falter. That was the thing that unraveled me first, not guilt, not surprise, not even a flicker of awkwardness. Just a half-second recalibration, and then she waved me over like I was the one who'd arrived late to something she'd organized. Morgan, oh my God, I was just talking about you. That sentence used to feel like warmth. That night, it felt like a door shutting. I walked over, I smiled, I shook Marcus's hand. And while the three of us made small talk against the Manhattan skyline, something cold and crystalline was forming in my chest, the shape of a question I hadn't thought to ask until that exact moment. What else has she been doing while I wasn't watching? The answer, when it came, was worse than I could have imagined. Ashley Carter and I met in the fall of 2012, freshman year at NYU, in a tiny film theory class that neither of us actually wanted to take. We'd both signed up to fulfill an arts requirement. We both showed up on the first day with the same beat-up copy of Ways of Seeing by John Berger, dog-eared at the exact same page. We'd looked at each other across the seminar table and laughed, the kind of immediate, startled laugh that feels like recognition. She was from Nashville, blonde and calculated in the most charming way possible, with an instinct for social navigation that I'd never encountered in someone my age. I was from Chicago, loud in ways I was slowly learning to be proud of, with a portfolio of graphic design work I'd been building since I was 14. We were both hungry, both broke, both absolutely convinced we were going to conquer New York before we turned 25. We did everything together in those early years. We pulled all-nighters at the library, sharing gas station coffee and bad playlists. We crashed gallery openings we weren't invited to, dressing up in our most credible outfits and nodding seriously at abstract paintings we didn't fully understand. We talked about our families, her difficult relationship with her mother, my complicated feelings about leaving home. We shared things we hadn't told anyone else. When her boyfriend Jake cheated on her junior year, I was the one who drove to her apartment at 2 in the morning with ice cream and a willingness to sit in silence. When my father lost his job, and I almost had to drop out, it was Ashley who helped me draft the financial aid appeal letter that kept me enrolled. We were the kind of friends who understood that loyalty wasn't a word, it was a practice. After graduation, we both ended up staying in New York. We lived together for 2 years in a cramped Bushwick apartment with a broken radiator and a breathtaking view of a parking garage. Those were good years, tight and loud and full of cheap wine and big plans. Then the plans started becoming real. Ashley landed a junior account manager role at a mid-size PR firm. I built my freelance design portfolio into something legitimate, and by 26 I was doing brand work for clients who actually had budgets. We celebrated each other, or at least, I thought we did. Looking back now, I can trace the hairline fractures in ways I couldn't at the time. The first thing I noticed and dismissed was the competitiveness. It was subtle. When I got a well-paying contract with a tech startup, she'd pivot quickly to something she was working on, not quite congratulating me before steering the conversation. When she got promoted, I celebrated loudly and genuinely, and she accepted it with a strange, almost transactional smile, like she was storing credit. The second thing was the information. Ashley had always been a great listener. I told her everything, every professional contact I'd made, every opportunity I was pursuing, every strategy I was building. I thought that was intimacy. I now understand it was inventory. But back then, I trusted her completely. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't announce itself. It borrows your own love to hide behind. The Marcus Hale situation had started 8 months before that rooftop party. I'd met Marcus at a design conference in February, a mid-sized, well-respected creative agency owner looking to expand his team. We'd had a 20-minute conversation that turned into an hour. He'd looked at my portfolio on his phone right there at the conference bar and said words that I still remember exactly. This is the kind of visual language I've been trying to find for 2 years. He wasn't ready to hire yet, the role was still being built, but we kept in touch. Monthly emails. The occasional coffee. He'd introduced me to two of his existing team members. I was being vetted, carefully and warmly, for a creative director position that would have tripled my income and finally given me the institutional base I'd been working toward for years. I told Ashley about it immediately. Of course I did. She was my best friend. Marcus Hale, she'd said, nodding slowly. I've heard of his firm. That's a serious opportunity, Morgan. I know, I said. I'm trying not to jinx it. You won't, she'd said. You're perfect for something like that. I told her about every coffee meeting. I told her when Marcus mentioned the role was getting closer to being officially posted. I told her the name of his assistant, the details of his company culture, the specific aesthetic philosophy he kept returning to in our conversations. I handed her a map and never once asked why she might need it. The rooftop party was a fundraiser for a design nonprofit, the kind of industry event where people circulate and build relationships. I'd been planning to go for weeks. I'd mentioned it to Ashley casually, not as an invitation, just in conversation. She'd said she had plans that night. She didn't have plans that night. She'd arrived early. I found this out later from a woman named Diane, a mutual contact who worked in the nonprofit's events team. Ashley had arrived 45 minutes before I did, made a point of finding Marcus, and introduced herself as my close colleague. She'd spent nearly an hour with him before I walked through the door. What did they talk about? I pieced it together over the following weeks. She'd told him she'd been following his firm's work for years. She'd name-dropped exactly the right projects I had mentioned to her. She'd expressed interest in the creative director role, the same role I was positioned for, framing herself as someone with a PR and brand strategy background that would complement his team in ways a pure designer might not. She hadn't lied outright, she just occupied the space I'd built, moved into the room I'd been carefully furnishing and rearranged the furniture. That night on the rooftop, watching them laugh together, I didn't know any of this yet. I just felt the wrongness of it, a low, humming frequency I couldn't quite name. On the cab ride home, I asked her how she knew Marcus. Oh, I've run into him at a few things, she said, looking at her phone. Small world. A lie so smooth, she didn't even look up to deliver it. Did you know he'd be there tonight? I asked. Not really, she said. These things overlap. 2 lies in under 30 seconds. I was sitting right next to her, I counted. I want to be honest about what happened next, because the version of me in that period wasn't entirely admirable. I didn't confront Ashley right away, instead I started watching, and the more I watched, the more I found. It started with small things, a comment from our friend Tyler that Ashley had asked him about my client relationships, just out of curiosity. A LinkedIn notification that Ashley had started following 3 of the specific contacts I'd mentioned building toward. The discovery, almost accidental, that she'd attended a portfolio review workshop at Marcus's firm, a semi-private event I hadn't mentioned to her, but that she could only have known about through the agency's internal newsletter, which she shouldn't have been on. I started sleeping poorly. I'd lie awake reconstructing conversations, looking for the moments where I'd handed her something she'd later used. There were so many of them. The generosity of our friendship, which I'd always been proud of, now looked different to me, like a resource she'd been quietly harvesting. I called our mutual friend Kelsey one night, half venting, trying to sound casual. Has Ashley ever said anything to you about Marcus Hale's firm? A pause, then. Actually, yeah. She mentioned a few weeks ago that she was in talks with someone at a really great agency. I assumed it was a PR thing. Did she mention how she connected with them? Another pause, longer this time. She said she met him at a networking event, said she'd been building the relationship for a while. I hung up the phone and sat very still for a long time. She was telling people she'd been building the relationship for a while. She'd been in contact with Marcus for a matter of weeks, but I'd been building it for 8 months, and she was retroactively absorbing that history into her own story. The audacity of it took my breath away. I want to say I handled this gracefully. I didn't. I became withdrawn around Ashley, which she noticed and responded to by being aggressively warm, texting me more, suggesting dinners, acting as though nothing had shifted, which somehow made it worse. It meant she wasn't confused by my distance. She was managing it. I started losing sleep in earnest. I drafted angry texts I didn't send. I rehearsed confrontations in the shower. I vented to my sister Dana, who told me plainly, Morgan, you need proof before you blow this up. Because if you're wrong, you lose the friendship. And if you're right, you need to be ready for what comes after. Dana has always been the smarter one. I knew she was right, so I waited, and I tried to stay close enough to Ashley that she didn't suspect I was watching. In the meantime, there was the professional damage to manage. Marcus had emailed me in that period, a friendly, low-pressure check-in, and I'd responded as normally as I could. but I noticed the tone had shifted slightly. He was warmer to me than he'd been before the party, which confused me until I realized. Ashley had probably spoken well of me. She needed me to get the role so she could position herself as the complimentary hire. She wasn't trying to replace me. She was trying to attach herself to me like a shadow that would eventually outgrow its source. That realization was worse than simple theft. This was architecture. 6 weeks after the rooftop party, I found the messages. Not through snooping. I want to be clear about that, because the way it happened matters. Ashley and I were working on a shared design mood board for a side project we'd been loosely collaborating on for months. She'd set it up on a shared Notion workspace, and when she accidentally added me to the wrong project, I found myself looking at something she hadn't intended me to see. It was a private notes folder she titled Agency Transition Plan. I almost closed it. I genuinely almost closed it. I didn't. The folder contained 3 months of notes, contact logs, a timeline for her pivot from PR into brand strategy, which was my lane, not hers, list of people to approach and how to approach them, and there, in a subpage labeled Key Contacts, was a section titled Hail Initial Introduction via Morgan, Relationship Transfer in Progress. Relationship Transfer in Progress. She had written those words. She had planned this the way you plan a project, with milestones and a vocabulary. I screenshotted everything. Hands shaking, barely breathing, I went through every page. There were notes about conversations we'd had, things I'd told her in confidence, labeled as intel and sorted by usefulness. There was a note about me specifically. M doesn't play politics well, won't push back if framed correctly. There was a timeline for when she expected to have sufficient independent standing, with Marcus that she wouldn't need my connection anymore. She had a phase-out plan, for me, for our friendship. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my apartment for a long time. Here is what I felt, in order. Disbelief, then a sickening confirmation, then grief so sharp it surprised me, then something quieter and colder than anger. Not rage, clarity. The particular clarity that arrives when you finally see something you've been avoiding. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the 2 a.m. ice cream runs, and the financial aid letter and the Bushwick apartment. I thought about all the ways I had loved her, not romantically, but in the full, cellular way you love someone who has been part of your formation as a person. And then I thought, she knew exactly what she was doing to all of that, and she did it anyway. I called Dana. I have proof, I said. A long pause. Okay, Dana said quietly, then we plan. I didn't go scorched earth. I want to be honest about the fact that I thought about it, thought about forwarding the screenshots to everyone in our mutual circle, about calling Marcus, about a dozen different forms of public exposure. I thought about all of it. But Dana talked me down, and she was right to. The people who matter will see it, she said. You don't need to make it a spectacle, you just need to stop performing like nothing happened. So I chose something more precise. First, Marcus. I emailed him and asked for a direct conversation, not about the role, but about something I needed to share with him professionally. He agreed to a coffee meeting the following week. I arrived with the screenshots on my phone, walked him through the timeline, and presented it without commentary. Let the notes folder speak. Let relationship transfer in progress sit between us in the quiet of the coffee shop. Marcus is a careful man, he didn't say much. He asked 2 questions, looked at my phone for a long time and then said, I appreciate you telling me this. The creative director role was offered to me formally 2 weeks later. Ashley never heard back from him again. Second, Kelsey and Tyler. I didn't send a group text or write a long post. I met them separately, told them what I'd found, showed them the relevant screenshots, and let them decide what to do with it. Kelsey was devastated. She'd considered Ashley a close friend too. Tyler was less surprised than I expected, which told me something I hadn't asked to know. Third, and this was the hard part, Ashley herself. I texted her and asked her to meet me for coffee. She responded immediately, enthusiastically, with 3 exclamation points. She arrived looking relaxed, wearing the cream blazer I'd once told her looked incredible on her. She ordered her usual oat latte. I ordered nothing. I found your agency transition plan, I said. She went very still. The Notion folder, I said. You added me to the wrong project. I saw the contact logs, the timelines, the section about Marcus, the notes about me. I paused. The phase-out schedule. She didn't deny it. That was the most damning thing. She didn't immediately say that's not what it looks like, or you misunderstood, or anything defensive at all. She just looked at me with that same expression I'd seen on the rooftop, that half-second recalibration, and then she set down her latte very carefully. I was going to tell you, she said, eventually. Tell me what, my voice was steady, I'd practiced this. That I wanted to move in a different direction professionally, that I was interested in brand strategy. That's not what the note said, Ashley. A silence. The note said relationship transfer in progress, I said. The notes used the word intel to describe things I told you in confidence as my best friend. The notes had a plan for when you wouldn't need me anymore. I looked at her. Which part of that were you going to tell me eventually? She looked out the window. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something genuine cross her face. Something that might have been shame. I've been feeling stuck, she said. For years, and you've always been so. You're so good at this, Morgan, you make it look easy, and she stopped. You thought you'd take what I'd built and use it for yourself. It wasn't like that. The notes say otherwise. The notes are, she stopped again. Then, I'm sorry, I know how this looks. It doesn't just look like anything, I said quietly. It is something. You spent months gathering information from me, used our friendship as access, and had a documented plan to exit the relationship once you didn't need it anymore. That's not a complicated thing. She didn't have an answer for that. I stood up, I picked up my bag. I've already spoken to Marcus, I said. And to Kelsey and Tyler. I'm not going to keep talking about this publicly, that's not who I want to be, but I'm done. I walked out of the coffee shop. She didn't follow. The weeks after that conversation were strange. Not dramatic, just strange. The way silence is strange when you're used to noise. The group chat, the one that had existed between me, Ashley, Kelsey, Tyler, and a few others since 2016, went quiet for a few days and then restructured itself organically without her. Nobody made an announcement, she was just no longer included. I don't know if that was fair, I've thought about it since. But I didn't engineer it. It happened the way things happen when truth moves through a social group and people make their own choices. Kelsey and I grew closer in the aftermath. There's something that happens between people who have processed the same grief, because that's what losing a long friendship is, even when the friendship deserved to end. Grief. Kelsey understood that. Tyler told me, about a month later, that Ashley had approached him years ago about a job contact of his in a similar way, mining their friendship for professional access. He'd always felt vaguely uncomfortable about it, but hadn't been able to name it. Hearing about what happened with me, he said, named it for him. Professionally, things moved forward. The creative director role became official. I started in January. Marcus turned out to be exactly the kind of boss I'd hoped for, rigorous, fair, genuinely invested in the team's growth. The work is good. Some days it's even great. I heard through the grapevine, which is to say, through a LinkedIn connection I didn't ask to update me but who did anyway, that Ashley had landed a brand strategy role at a smaller firm downtown. I felt nothing complicated about that. I hope she's good at the work. I hope she got there on her own. I went back and reread some of the old text threads between us. The ones from 2013, 2015, 2018. The easy ones, the funny ones, the threads that stretched for hundreds of messages through hard months. That friendship was real, I'm certain of it. Whatever Ashley became or always partly was, there was something genuine in those early years. I choose to believe that, not for her sake but for mine. What I lost was significant. I don't want to minimize it. 11 years of closeness, of shared history, of the specific comfort that comes from someone who knew you before you became who you are, that doesn't just get replaced. I still reach for my phone some mornings, some instinct still typing her name before I catch myself. But here is what I've kept. I've kept my clarity about who I give access to. Not cynicism, I'm not interested in becoming someone who holds everyone at arm's length. But there's a version of openness that isn't generosity, it's carelessness, and I practiced it for years. I told Ashley everything because it felt like intimacy. I understand now that intimacy is reciprocal. Disclosure is not intimacy unless the other person treats it with care. I've kept my sense of what I built. The relationship with Marcus, the portfolio, the career trajectory, none of that came from connection to Ashley. It came from 8 years of work. She tried to borrow it. She couldn't because it was never a transferable thing. It was mine. And I've kept the friendships that proved themselves. Kelsey, Tyler, Dana, who always knew more than she said, these are not performances of loyalty. These are people who, when the smoke cleared, were still standing. That matters more than I knew how to say before all of this. 3 months after I walked out of that coffee shop, I was working late in my new office, my actual office, with a door and a nameplate, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I knew the new area code. She'd moved. The message read: I've been thinking about what I did for a long time. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that you were the best friend I've ever had, and I treated that like a resource instead of a gift. I don't know when I became someone who could do that, but I'm trying to figure it out. I'm sorry, Morgan, genuinely. I read it 3 times. I thought about the cream blazer, the oat latte set down so carefully, the half-second recalibration on the rooftop. I thought about relationship transfer in progress. I thought about what Dana had said when I first called her with proof, her voice quiet and steady. You just need to stop performing like nothing happened. I set my phone face down on the desk. I looked out the window at the city, all lit up and indifferent the way New York always is, full of people in the middle of stories that will take years to understand. I didn't respond that night. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will someday. Maybe forgiveness is something I'll grow into, slowly, the way you grow into other things you weren't ready for. But here's what I've learned about betrayal, the real, patient, architectural kind. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as a villain. It arrives wearing your best friend's face, quoting your own stories back to you, sitting across from you at 1,000 ordinary dinners while it quietly builds a door-marked exit. The only revenge that actually means anything is becoming someone the exit couldn't diminish. I got there, it took longer than I wanted, but I got there. And I didn't need her help.